Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Mary LaCourciere, and I'm the Director of Education here at the NHA. So thank you for coming tonight. You may need some sunglasses because it's a little shiny up here. If you haven't noticed, it's some pretty amazing things. So I'm here tonight. I have the honor of introducing Steve Smithers. I met Steve 10 plus years ago because I was looking for a silversmith to join our crew at the Decorative Arts program, and I called Don Carpenter. So if anybody knows who that is, he was the founder and leader of Eastfield Village in Nassau, New York. And I didn't even finish my question to Don before I said, I need a silver. He said, Steve Smithers. And that was the end of the conversation. So Steve has been with us ever since then. And he's an amazing guy, as many of you here are attest to. So Steve is a master silversmith. He's been creating hand-hammered hollowware in lighting in silver and bronze and brass for many years, and restoring pieces as well. He's taught extensively. He's been a featured symposium speaker, a master demonstrator, all sharing the love and discipline of this beautiful fine art. His client list, it really reads like the who's who in the museum and fine craft world. To name a few, he's the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the MFA in Boston, Yale University Art Gallery, Historic Deerfield, Eastfield Village, North Bennett Street School, and the Nantucket Historical Association. So we're proud to be on that list. He's taught with us, and he has created a loyal following of new silversmiths who year after year sojourn back to his class, and to the point where no one else can get in this class. So it's a little bit of a private club. So this year, to solve that issue, we actually had a second class, and we have a whole new crop of silversmiths on the verge. And they make beautiful pieces every year and precious things, and each year they come back to add to their collections. So welcome, Steve Smithers. We're in for a treat to learn about this fine art and also Nantucket silver, as well as the tools in making these beautiful pieces. Steve?
Thank you, Mary. That was a very generous introduction. I'm pleased to be here. It's always a pleasure every year to come back to Nantucket, and we come from a faraway place, about as far away as you can get and still be in Massachusetts. So I am a Massachusetts boy, man. We come from the northwest corner in the high ground, and we always miss the ocean, so it's always a pleasure to come back here into this special place and pass on the knowledge to my wonderful students. Very enthusiastic they are, and so it's a pleasure for me. And as Mary said, we've been coming here for about 10 years to do this, and long ago we came here, I think, as youngsters, well, I would say right out of college, and that was my first introduction to Nantucket. So it was a great pleasure to hear from Mary that we should come and do some teaching. So what my plan here today is to discuss the history of silversmithing, the silversmiths of Nantucket, and those who were part of the Nantucket history, as well as discuss and show the ways in which pieces were made using a small portion of my tools. I've got more than this back at the 1800 house, and then I've got double that still in my shop that I didn't bring. And of course, every time we're teaching and somebody has a little project, and then I say, well, gee, that's the tool I should have brought. This one we won't touch all week, but that one I wished I had brought. But we all get through with what we have, which is significant. And thanks too to Mort and Reva Schlesinger, who I met on the first time over, who wonderful couple who were silversmiths, and we had a nice time there. They invited us into their house. I think we had some of their homemade blackberry brandy, and then went upstairs, curved stairs to the top of 45 India Street, where they did their silversmithing. So thanks to them, some of these tools I acquired from them as well. Before I talk about silversmithing, it would be appropriate to talk about silver itself, and where this material came from. And it's remarkable. It's cosmic, and it came from, if I can be corny here, a place long, long ago and far, far away. I stole that from Star Wars. But the origin of silver is from supernovas, which continued to happen, and each one created new elements which got thrown out into the universe, and eventually silver was one of them, and came and found its way into this cloud that became Earth, until humans started fooling around in these rocks. What can we do with them? And started putting them in the fire and seeing them melt into and basically smelt, separate into separate elements such as silver. And then, what can we do with this? And this is as long ago as 5,000 BC, and around the world too, Middle East, Far East, Northern Europe, and so all over, people were discovering, what you could do with this wonderful material, as well as copper and other things. And another interesting aspect about the material is the metalsmiths were the first recyclers, because as soon as you hammered something, and whatever it was, crude way back then, you didn't like it, just throw it in the fire and melt it and make something else. And this has been going on since man started working, the various metals. So to this day, when I make something out of silver, I order silver from a company in sheet form, or wire form, and they have been recycling. I send my extra chips and material to be recycled. It's been going on forever. So you sometimes think, well, what if some of the molecules in this teapot that I just made, some of them could have been in a Paul Revere piece, could have been in a Egyptian, queen's bracelet or something. So you never know. It's the history of the metal. And that was happening in the colonial days of silversmithing in this country and others. People would bring their damaged silver, or even worse, I hate to think of it, but out of style silver, Rococo piece or a Baroque piece, and it's no longer in style. I want federal. And so the silversmith would melt down some old masterpiece so that they could fashion a new piece. So that's some of the interesting aspects of the material. Best conductor of heat is silver, and so I enjoy working with it. It's a very, very forgiving. So I'm going to start with talking about some of the silversmiths of Nantucket, and actually the first one who had interactions with Nantucket was Jeremiah Dummer of Boston, who was the first American-trained silversmith in America. Learned from Hull and Sanderson, who were the very first ones who came over from England. Dummer bought some land in the late 1600s, 1697, I think, from Hussey, Stephen Hussey, I believe it is, and then in the process of doing this transaction, ended up making Dummer made a tankard for John Swain and Experience Folger, great first name. I've never heard of anyone with that name, but Swain and Folger are pretty familiar Nantucket names. And that tankard was then left to their daughter, Hannah Gardner, another familiar name. And the tankard payment was involved in the deal for the land. So Dummer never lived here, or never worked here, rather. He was in Boston, but he did have that first interaction. And then the first silversmith who lived and worked in Nantucket was John Jackson, and this is a Porringer that is here in front of us, made by John Jackson. He lived here. He was born in early 1700s and lived till 1772. So that was about 60 something. That's how his lifespan. He was a New York trained goldsmith, and then moved to Boston and worked there before 1750, at which point he came to Nantucket, and shortly after that. We understand that, and I understand from my research too, that the house was built on Orange Street and Plum Lane for John Jackson, and so that was the first silversmith of Nantucket. And here we have an engraved spoon, also by Jackson. So Jackson did a number of pieces, hollowware, flatware, and we're moving on to Benjamin Bunker, who then was also, in fact, the most prolific silversmith in Nantucket's history, who apprenticed to John Jackson. And apparently he lived as an apprentice in the Jackson house, which as I understand later became the bunker house. Is that correct? Not sure, but what I am interested in is his lifespan. He was born in 1754 and lived to 1842. That's 88 years. And so he married Rebecca Folger and worked throughout the years. The Revolutionary War years were bad for all silversmiths everywhere in America. They disappeared for the most part. They fought in the war. The British were taking over this various cities and such. So there was some lean years there when silversmiths would also do things like clock repair, clock making, jewelry and such. Bunker was also very involved with the Masonic Lodge. I made lots of jewels for the Union Lodge in Nantucket and various other things. An interesting side note to that Masonic story is that Paul Revere, who was the Grand Master of the Grand Lodge in Boston, was forced to write a letter to the Union Lodge telling them that they better pay their dues, and if they didn't, they would be viewed upon as a clandestine lodge, and so they promptly took care of that business. So there is that little connection with Paul Revere. So here we have a bunker Porringer, same form as the Jackson, larger even. And these are hammered up out of a sheet of metal, which I'll briefly demonstrate. Unless you wanted to hang around for about 20 hours and listen to the hammering, and then you might see a finished product, but maybe even more actually. And then the handles are cast and pierced. They both have the exact same style, very classic early American keyhole style, they call it. And so those are here. Here we have a can also. It's called a can, and some people call it a mug or a tankard, but this form with the belly like that is typically can, C-A-N-N, and that's raised up from one disc, hammered over anvils, some of which I have here, very laboriously and gradually raising it up into a taller and more shapely piece with a cast handle, and that will be a cast base. Sometimes they were hammered. But Benjamin Bunker, as I said, was really quite prolific, and so we'll talk a little more about the house and the speculation. I'm not sure if how much there is known about where the shops for the Nantucket early silversmiths were, but we'll talk about that in a second. There's one other silversmith I wanted to mention, Samuel Barrett, 1740 to 1815, so he was 75. So, lots of times silversmiths back then didn't live that long, but these guys lived a pretty good life, I guess. And so, and an interesting story about Samuel Barrett was when he moved here in 1763, the townspeople and the selectmen actually discouraged him and actually almost kind of threatened him. He wasn't welcome to come, and I think apparently John Jackson had something to do with it, like there's only room for one of us on this island kind of thing. But Barrett paid no attention, and they eventually got along quite well. And his family, his daughter Sally married a Pellick Macy, so another well-known name, and his granddaughter married a gardener. So, these names are all tied in with Nantucket history for sure. Then there's the later silversmiths, William Hadwin, who was in alliance with Jabez Gorham for a while on the mainland. Perhaps did a little bit of silversmithing, but really I think his main thing was retailing, and purchasing from others, silversmiths. Kelly's were another name in silversmithing. James Easton, another. These are all 19th century silversmiths who were probably more retailers than actual working silversmiths. So that's a little of the history of the actual silversmiths in Nantucket. Now this piece here is kind of interesting because this is another piece that has Nantucket history, in that it was made by a Boston silversmith, Robert Evans, and given to Gideon Gardner for building a better lifeboat, essentially. It's a beautiful, classic Liverpool-style picture. Revere made some like that. It's in the collection of historic Deerfield. So there is some suggestion that maybe it could be borrowed and shown here someday, but it is a very much a Nantucket object. And there's the engraving, as you can see. So going back to Silversmith Shops, there are only, to my knowledge, and I believe that's as far as anyone knows, there are two shops in the Northeast here that are original silversmith shops of the 18th century that are still standing to this day. This one is in, of all places, Southampton, Long Island, right in the middle of town, right next to Ralph Lauren and other shops of that sort. And it was adjoined to the house, which was built in the 1750s, I believe. And the house was long ago taken, but the shop still remains because it was so quaint, and they turned it into a tea room and a bookstore and a variety of things. And the Historical Society owns that of Southampton now, so you can go in and you can see the original forge, brick forge. And I had a nice opportunity to go there and look at it and determine, what I could about the forge and, the way it was utilized and all. This one is more recent to me, is in Norwich, Connecticut. And it's the Joseph Carpenter Silversmith shop. Someone there said to me, it's kind of too bad his name was Carpenter. It's a little confusing, but it's the Carpenter Silversmith shop. So, and actually, part of it, the left half was a silversmith shop, and the right half, he had a partner who actually sold some goods and things besides silver in the shop. And they have recently kind of renovated it, I guess we should say, so that people can sort of see what a silversmith shop might have looked like. And here's early on when they discovered the original forge behind a closet in a wall and everything. So it's kind of interesting, and you can see these were small shops. This is an actual recreation at historic Deerfield. Beautiful with the forge, the bellows, giant bellows, and the tin sort of goes all over the place, where the air, when you move these giant bellows, would bring the fire up to the temperature, which is like working temperature, anywhere from 1500 to heat the metal to make it malleable to 1800-ish to melt it, so you could cast it. And so these are images with a all period recreation, a draw bench for drying wire. And it's just a very comfortable place. And here is me in one of my many times there, once or twice a year, at least a year for a day, with a Paul Revere shirt, sort of playing Paul Revere, basically. Every time I walk in the door, it just is so authentic. It's like you almost feel like Paul Revere just walked out the back door. So it's a lot of satisfaction doing that. And here I am hammering up a deep bowl, actually, one like that, a bullet-shaped teapot, as one of the tea sets I've made 2 or 3 of each time. Very intense operation, to say the least, as you're raising up a piece of silver much larger than this, and starting with a big disc and hammering it down into wooden blocks and stumps. It's a very common thing you'd have with these hollows in wooden blocks. And then after that, hammering over raising stakes with one of these various hammers that I have here. So that was a classic shape, and this is essentially my own interpretation, the apple shape or bullet shape, so I call it an apple shape really, it preceded the lighthouse coffee pot. For the most part, there were a few lighthouse coffee pots in that period, but you never saw them together as a set. And sugar and creamer to match the the shape of the pieces. So that was probably well over 100 hours, 130 or 40 maybe for the apple shape. A little under 100 for the lighthouse. So, we're talking 250 to 300 hours for the set. So it's a lot of work. And this is when I learned it was on this teapot that I learned the limits of silver, because as you start to make it deeper and deeper and then start to neck it in on itself, you're really pushing the limits of the silver to the point where it starts to crack. So then you've gone far enough. The other thing was I was so into this. I also found out the limits of my arm, because I kept going and going and going, and I developed tendinitis. It didn't last too long, but I was so focused I wasn't noticing the messages I was getting from my arm. I recovered. I was a lot younger then. So that is that piece. The next piece is something else we do, which is brass lighting, but we hammer it. And by we, I say myself and my son has worked with me for years, and also had a friend worked with me for a while. But this is a triple tier in the Deerfield Church of the brick church in the center of historic Deerfield. So it's a wonderful classic setting with the columns and the box pews and the big pedestal. 2-story. You had to go up the back stairs to be way up there, so you could look at the people on the balcony and down on the people on the floor. But anyway, it was a wonderful thing, and I got to sing in the choir, the Messiah, and a few other things with my daughter and grandson, looking out at the chandelier that we made for Easter or Christmas, something like that. So it was a special moment. This is a table centerpiece, a pern that I made in '95, hand-blown glass by Bob Dane, who many years after this was done had a shop here on Center Street, Dane Glass, for a number of years until a few years ago. And so that was my own design. That was, I think, 150 something hours. Colonial-ish, but not a copy of any one in particular. This shows casting a ball and clawfoot that I carved and then did clay, sand, it's really clay-ish sand casting. So that's another technique for creating elements of your pieces. Sheet, hammering, casting. Those are two of the methods. Let's see. I've got 12 more images here. I could tell more stories about what these are. and I will make them brief. This is a Miriam's cup that I made for a woman who entered it in a competition at a synagogue, and it was so well received that the Jewish Museum of New York bought one, and it's in that museum. So it was quite a thing. This is a peace pipe that I made, a replica of the very rare, famous peace pipes that were made for the Greenville Treaty with the Indians in 1814, rather. Beautiful, not at all like a native pipe, but this is what the Americans thought was a good gift for those who helped us in the War of 1812, given by Major General Harrison, William Henry Harrison, to the various tribes that helped us, peace and friendship. Well, we all know how that really kind of worked out, but you know, I did get to attend. I made a replica for the Shawnee Museum in Greenville, right at the site of the treaty, and it was actually a replica of the place, sort of a gazebo-type building, and Native Americans came in from all over Canada and America to commemorate. This was in 2014 that I did that. I brought my peace pipe, and they did a reenactment, I suppose, of that. Very moving. The trees were over 200 years old that surrounded it, so they're the same trees that were there at that time. And moving along, this is a cow creamer. Speaks for itself. A classic English form, except for the English ones had where they have the hinged lid, had a fly, of all things. I guess they thought cows and flies kind of go together, and they weren't grossed out by flies back then or something, I don't know. The guy who commissioned this suggested we do something else, and I said, how about a bird? Because I actually saw a bird sitting on the cow across the street when I was making this, so it was a eureka type moment. And I also had something to keep checking, you know, as I made the, I don't know if I have the prototype here or not, but anyway. And here it is, half of the cow started, and I'm doing the chasing in pitch of the details of the face. Here is my White House ornament made in 1999 for the Blue Room Christmas tree. Hillary Clinton, First Lady at the time, invited a bunch of artisans on the best list, including Carpenter, the great potter and all-purpose Renaissance man, I would have to say. And we all made a little, not a little, it had to be, because it's a giant tree, it had limits how small it could be. And this was about that large. Paul Revere and his ride. I figured Massachusetts, and I'm a silversmith, so what better theme than that? And a few other things here. This is the old chapel at UMass Amherst that I made as a presentation piece for the man named Eugene Eisenberg School of Management, for Mr. Eisenberg. Restoration of period pieces, at which it goes hand in hand with what I've been doing for years. The restoration, even before I started making my own pieces. So a lot of things that I've worked on are 17th, 16th century, sometimes 14th, a few of them even 13th and 12th. So amazing stuff. When you see them, you get to work on them and learn from them. When you're restoring a piece, you're trying to, it rubs off the design, the workmanship, and how you can do your work and make it so it doesn't look like somebody just, was working on it. Here's an example of a period coffee pot, English, that I did some restoration on, and then the man asked if I would design a sugar and creamer that never actually came with it, but that would look like it came with it. So that was great opportunity to, mimic the lid, the handle of the creamer, the swirled finial, and make it look like it always was a set. Here I am at the MFA when they opened up, shortly after they opened up the new wing. Gosh, that must have been 5 or 6, 7 years ago now anyway. And this is the aforementioned Morton Riva Schlesinger. Here we have a beautiful fluted bowl, and another piece of theirs, part of the series of Christmas ornaments that they made for quite some time, I guess, and might have been 20 years or so. This would be almost predominantly just sheet work and jeweler's saw, very delicate, cutting out all the details in the windows and they did a great deal of that. And I guess the whole collection of those is in the museum here. So thanks to them for that, and for the tools that I ended up with some, and the 1800 house. We got the rest, and we use them there as well. So that brings us back to the Gardner picture, which I know this isn't a lifeboat, but it's a whaling boat. But however, I imagine the lifeboats were almost the size and shape of these. But he came up, this man, Gideon Gardner, came up with what they called in the records a better lifeboat. So the Mass Humane Society, as we said, gave this to him. So then I was kind of going to do a little bit of hammering, so and at least demonstrate and show the tools of the trade. And here I have, let's see, 3, 6, 9, 12, 13 hammers, and they're all different for different things. Forging, and here's an example of forging. One of my esteemed customers, who is in attendance here, is working on a replica of a ladle I made. And right now, this is hot off the press, or the hammer. He's halfway, I don't know, maybe not quite halfway. He's well on the way, though, to forging this piece of round, substantial wire in the top to flare out the the top and create a pattern, which you can make any number of patterns for the flatware. And the bowl is already finished, so it's looking good. So that's forging, and we use hammers. This is one of them that I use, and then there's another forming and forging hammer. So for the purpose of these forging hammers and sinking hammers as well is to hammer your piece of metal straight down into a form. And I'm not going to do much of that because, well, the table won't fall down, I'm pretty sure, but you're basically working slowly but surely around the perimeter. In this case, it happens to be an oval. So who says you can't hammer an oval piece in a round hole? It's a takeoff, obviously. Never mind. And so as you hammer, first this was cut out. We'll just go back one step. We have patterns. So you hammer, you trace the pattern. If it happens to be a circle, we can just use a divider or a compass. If it's an oval, then we need to kind of resort to various patterns of different sizes, obviously, and even shapes, some are more elongated than others or whatever. And using shears, we also have more modern aviation snips, but these work this is what we've classically have been using for hundreds of years. And then once you've cut it out, you have to heat it red hot because the sheet or wire, for that matter, has been machined and rolled through rolling mills. They've been around a couple hundred years as well, rolling mills and such. So it's been worked already, and it's very stiff. So you heat it red hot and cool it, and it becomes very malleable. Then you can work it and hammer it so that it gradually takes shape. And the deeper the shape you hammer, the more times you have to stop and anneal it, re-anneal it, heat it red hot, quench it again, because as you hammer it, it work hardens. So that's true of any deep shape that you're making, and especially if you're raising. But before I get to that, this is just a different sort of practice shape. Actually, I've had it forever, and it kind of looks like a flower, lobes here. I don't remember why I did it, but it's a great piece to show at demonstrations and stuff. And then we have hammers that are meant for raising. So they're rounded in this way, but they're straight across the top this way. And what that helps you do is, and in this case, I'll change this to a raising hammer. And I don't know if you can see it or not, but you basically now hammer over the top And that allows you to slowly and methodically, it allows you to gradually make it deeper and deeper shape. Because you can only go so far by sinking, because it thins out the metal as you hammer it down. So the deeper you make a bowl by sinking, the thinner it gets in the middle. With this technique, to make it like the apple teapot, for example, the thickness of the metal never changes, even as you hammer it thousands and thousands of times. And for an apple teapot, it really is. I did a rough calculation. I really think it was close to 100,000 hammer blows, because you do this for hours, you know, more than one a second. That adds up. So makes my arm tired just thinking about it. So anybody who's thinking out there, where are you, of commissioning an apple teapot, maybe I have one more left in me. Anyway, anyway, the different other hammers I have here, you know, these are all steel hammers, but here's a chasing hammer for doing the repoussé or detailed work with little punches, so it has a nice shape and balance to it, so you can do this. Nice for deep vessels, a forming hammer. Planishing hammer for finishing. After you've shaped the piece, you want to now iron out the rough forging marks. So then you do this in a much more deliberate manner over the whole surface, and it just gives you a nice, smooth, slightly hammered surface. And here is a hammer made of horn. For certain things, it's wonderful. We used it today to stretch a beaded wire that I cut too short a little bit, and we got it just by hammering on this. It stretched out without squashing the little beaded edge. Rawhide, wood. So other tools here. The jeweler's saw, which is that delicate saw blade that is used in piercing, as in the Christmas ornaments. You can do very fine, detailed pieces for an interior. Drill a hole and then put your blade through the hole and tighten up the blade in place, and you can cut out interior details. So we did that. And what else do we have here for tools? These are burnishing tools for actually finishing, for removing scratches and file marks, things of that sort. We have little spoon stakes is what they are. Small anvils. Here's an example of a silversmith who makes his own tools. Well, I was walking along years ago the railroad tracks. I think we were by the Hoosick Tunnel, so it was okay to be there. And you see all this great iron on the ground, and I saw this it was all rusty and pitted, but the shape was like, oh, that'd be a great planishing stake. Ground it, filed it, polished it up, and it's my favorite thing. um, other complex forms that I've learned, found this in an old book, was how to make a handle like the hollow handle on this tankard. And so, very interesting. You start with a strip like this, you bend it on the flat to the shape you want, S-curve, and then you solder the two ends to a brass wire. Then you can start hammering back and forth, and eventually create this, which is my prototype, a channel that is curved this way and this way. And that's a very classic thing for late 18th century, middle 18th century too, even on the earlier side, handles. Once you get the one single piece finished, then you take another strip and press it and wire it in place and silver solder on both sides, and you get the hollow handle, the classic hollow handle. Some of these other pieces, the replica of a Paul Revere cup, these pieces, several of these pieces were commissioned by James Robinson Shop, and one of present owner who is an enthusiastic silversmith in the 1800 class. Nevertheless, he wanted this is in the MFA, and he thought it was very nice, and I did too. The very unusual one point of connection of this handle, and it's really solid. Once I made it, it said, "Oh yeah, that's fine." And you're kind of a little bit worried because most handles would be two points, and it's not. In the picture, it looks like in the book, it looks like a teacup until you measure it, and this is the size of the original pair that he made. So it's like, well, this isn't for tea. This is definitely for something else. So that's kind of an overview of. Oh, one other story too. Of all these wonderful things I've had the opportunity to be a part of, like the peace pipe ceremony. Another one was I got a call from the Mass. What was it? The office of Galvin's office. Regardless, whatever it was, and they were about to pull out this time capsule from underneath the State House cornerstone. So they pulled it out, great fanfare, it was on TV and everything, and the conservationists from the MFA was under there chiseling away, and then they brought it the next day and dusted it off, brass box, and they dusted it off, and all on, filmed, and they opened it up, and what they found was Paul Revere plaque and some papers and some mint, some pine tree shillings, that sort of thing. And so then they called me because the MFA said, well, talk to this guy. They'll make a replica of the plaque. And meantime, they were having a new time capsule made. And so at the end of the, 3 or 4 months, we made this plaque with all the updated, using the same engraved hand engraver that I work with, same engraving style as Paul Revere, which was very charming and colonial. They made the updated version, only instead of 2 or 3 people's names on it, there was 4 or 5 people who got their names engraved on this plaque that was going to go back in the time capsule. I guess it was a source of anxiety. But the original plaque that Paul Revere made, Samuel Adams was the governor, and Paul Revere was the Grand Master of the Masonic. So anyway, we finished this plaque. They had this ceremony on the steps of the State House in Boston, and it was a total spectacle. They had down at the base of the Common, there's the Grand Lodge, a Masonic Lodge, 1,300 Masons in full gear, with everything, and the flags come marching up 2 by 2, and then there was a team of white horses pulling the cornerstone. There was fife and drums. There was hundreds of kids, all in the same colored T-shirt, school kids. All the congressional people and the senators and representatives, and everyone was there. The Grand Master currently of the lodge, big speeches, the governor, and then they did once it was in place, they put the new box in, and they did the Masonic rituals of the gold chalice and, pouring the corn and the wine and this 2 or 3 or 4 different things. And each time the whoever did it said, "It has been achieved," and then the Grand Master would say, the workman has done his duty, or some. It's just so ceremonial. And then it ended up with, they had set up 3 howitzers, and they did a 21-gun cannon salute. And then they put my plaque and a few modern things in with the Paul Revere plaque and some other things from the original time capsule, and put it in there. And so that's my connection to Paul Revere, I suppose, besides copying some of his work. I hope he doesn't mind, but at any rate, I think there's more to be said, but I think we'll leave it at that.
I'm sure you have some questions for him, which you can ask, but we welcome you to come and take a look at these tools. The tools themselves are works of art. And check out the silver. Please don't touch, because we have our curator, Michael Harrison, has an evil eye on you. So it's from our collection, and as well as Steve. So thank you so much. We welcome you to come up.
Thank you. I'll say a couple more things quickly. There's 4 objects that are period for the collection that no one will let you touch, but you can look. But my things, you're welcome to handle. And one last note on the tools, by the way. Many of them are 100 years old, 150, a few of them. So they all have this history, and many people have had them before. So when you're using those tools, it's kind of like they kind of teach you what to do. So just thought that was worth saying. So anyway, any questions or?
Curious, do metalsmithing?
Well, that's a new, a little more modern art, and it can be done. That goes back to my pre hammering days when I actually was a machinist at the very beginning. And yes, it's a very classic quick way of creating, deep bowls and things. So that is the way it's done and has been for 100 years or more. And its production, it's nice. It, however, doesn't have the character and charm of the hammered finish. So I think so, yeah, because the ones that with a machine is being a production item over a form, every one is exactly the same, but more importantly, it's smooth. It's very, mirror-like smooth, the surface. Whereas when you look at, hammered pieces, there's light deflection. There's, you can just see the difference. It just kind of has more character, I guess is the word. Even if you've kind of made it as smooth as you can, there's always the hammered, effect. And in some cases, you leave more of the hammering because you like it better, or people like it better. So it's sometimes people get fooled, but almost anything. It's amazing, like the peace pipe. Typically cups, bowls, maybe, but everything is different. You never know. Next thing you know, somebody is asking for, a replica of a building. Well, I guess I can figure that out. That's kind of the history of my shop. After I opened my own shop in 1979, was, I decided I liked this kind of metalworking. It was interesting, had a story. Every piece had a story, history, research and stuff. So I just decided to go with it. I opened up my shop, and people would bring me stuff. Can you fix this? Can you make that? And I always say yes, because what was I doing quitting my job and opening up a little shop and 2 kids and stuff? But I said yes, and that's how you learn stuff. And so through the years, countless shapes and silver, brass, bronze, copper, gold. Made a gold sunflower pendant for one person. Another who had a big berry farm asked if I could make a strawberry, very delicate little thing, and get the shape right and the texture and put it on a chain. And, so you just never know. Or some big statue that you're working on or repairing. I mean, it's just an endless variety. So it never ends. They're different all the time. I hammered that tubing. That was thing about that wonderful, delicate peace pipe was, see if I can bring it up quickly, was that it was tapered. It's very delicate, and so the size of it was like this, and so it was this long. It was tapered. In other words, it just got ever so slightly narrower all the time. So I couldn't just go. You could buy tubing that would have been fine, but I know I had to make this So I had to make this long strip of silver and having it get a little bit narrower all the time, and then make it my own little mandrel in brass that got thinner and thinner, hammer it around, and silver solder the whole length of the seam, and then bend it without, crimping it as you were bending it. So it was, it's just another thing where it's like, well, it seems like it's impossible, but I know it's not because somebody did it. So you just sort of, jump in, and sometimes you have I did have the first one I made, I tried putting lead into it, which was a classic technique so that I could bend it quickly without it crimping. Well, the problem was it got the shape, but then I tried to melt out the lead, which has a much lower temperature, but because of the flux inside where I had soldered this, I hadn't been cleaned out completely, that reacted with the lead, and it just made suddenly you got this new alloy which melted like right, and so I had all this holes everywhere. It's like Swiss cheese. It's like, oh my God. So I just did it. I just kept annealing it and bending it a little bit and a little bit, and annealing it some more, and it worked. So I've made 3 of those. That was a highlight too. I have, of course, a polishing wheel, which is sort of cheating, but hand polishes are there are various good paste polishes I like, and hand polishes of that sort. So there's different techniques for polishing about. But the thing about silver that, a lot of people say, well, I don't want to use it because it tarnishes and then you have to polish it. And I always say, well, if you use it periodically, even once a month, and at the end of the meal you wash it just like anything and dry it, and put it away. Don't let it sit for, months on end. Then it'll start to tarnish. Just use it more often. So that's kind of how they used to do it, I think.